I shouldn't have noticed the way she looked at me. Not for what I was there to do. It started simple enough. Her router had been acting up for days, and since I lived in the apartment 2 floors down, the building manager asked me to take a look. You know computers, right? Go help her out. He'd said it casually, but his tone had that subtle curiosity people get when they sense a story waiting to happen. She opened the door in a loose, pale sweater and dark jeans, her hair pinned back like she'd done it quickly, without checking a mirror. The kind of casual that somehow made her look even more composed. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside. Her voice wasn't overly warm, but there was something in the pause between her words, as if she was taking my measure before letting me in. The apartment smelled faintly of brewed coffee, though the cup on the table had gone cold. Light spilled in through half-drawn curtains, landing in uneven stripes across the hardwood. I knelt by the router, fiddling with cables, explaining what I was doing more out of habit than necessity. She didn't say much, just leaned against the doorway to the kitchen, arms folded, watching. Her eyes weren't suspicious, more searching. I tried not to look up too often, but when I did, she didn't look away. "Is this what you do?" she asked after a while. "Sort of. Not for a living. Just good with fixing things." A corner of her mouth lifted, as if that answer had given her more information than I meant to. There was a quiet tension between us, the kind that isn't awkward exactly, but feels like standing too close to the edge of something you're not sure you're ready to fall into. I found myself stretching out the repair longer than necessary, checking connections twice, updating the firmware even though it didn't need it. She moved closer, setting her cup down beside me on the table. "You're very focused," she said softly. I laughed under my breath. "Part of the job. I don't think this is your job." It was an odd statement, and it sat there between us, heavier than it should have been. She didn't elaborate. I handed her my phone so she could check if the Wi-Fi was working. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it. A barely there touch, but enough to feel how warm her skin was compared to mine. Her gaze lingered on the screen, but I could tell she wasn't reading it. "Looks fine now," she said at last. I stood, and suddenly the space between us felt smaller than the apartment itself. "Thank you," she added. But it wasn't a polite dismissal. It was something else. Something that made the air in the room shift. I started to step back toward the door, but she tilted her head, watching me like she was about to say something she hadn't decided on yet. Instead, she just asked, "Do you ever fix things twice?" Her question, "Do you ever fix things twice?" sat in my head long after I'd stepped back. There was no good reason to stay. The Wi-Fi was working perfectly. My part was done. And yet I didn't move toward the door. "Sometimes," I said finally, my voice lower than I intended. She leaned against the table, arms no longer folded, one hand tracing the rim of her abandoned coffee cup. "That's a nice skill, to keep coming back to something until it's right." It shouldn't have sounded like an invitation, but it did. I told myself this wasn't dangerous, just a neighbor helping a neighbor. Except I knew the truth. She'd been in the building only 2 months. I'd heard the rumors before I met her. A marriage ending quietly, the kind where both parties stop talking long before they move out. She'd been on her own since. And me, well, I was 23, which was exactly the kind of age people warned you not to take moments like this too seriously. Still, I couldn't stop noticing her. The faint silver at her temples that she didn't bother to dye. The way her sweater slipped slightly off one shoulder when she reached for her phone. The little pause before she spoke, as if weighing whether her words might change something between us. "I didn't catch your name," she said, almost as an afterthought. "Daniel." She nodded slowly, as if filing it away. "I'm Claire." The sound of it settled into me like it belonged there. "You must be busy," she said, glancing toward the door. But her eyes didn't follow. They stayed on me, almost daring me to agree. I shook my head. "Not really." She smiled, but it wasn't casual. "Then maybe you could take a look at something else. My laptop's been strange lately." I knew this was crossing into a place where the lines got blurry. Helping with the Wi-Fi was neutral. Sitting with her in the quiet, in her space, for longer than necessary, that was something else. Still, I followed her to the desk in the corner. The laptop was open but dark, the screen reflecting the two of us standing too close. She sat down, brushing against my arm as she adjusted the chair. I told myself it was an accident, but neither of us moved away. As I started checking the settings, she asked, "Do you always help people this much?" "Not really," I said, and immediately wished I hadn't, because it made the silence that followed feel heavier. Her hand came to rest lightly on my forearm, just above the wrist. "Warm. Still. I appreciate it," she said, her voice softer now. I should have pulled back. I didn't. Her hand lingered on my forearm just long enough for me to forget what I was supposed to be doing. The laptop screen flickered back to life, pulling me out of the moment, but not far enough. I leaned slightly over her shoulder, pointing to the settings, my sleeve brushing her hair. She didn't shift away. "You're patient," she murmured. "Not always," I said, which earned a faint smile from her, the kind that carried something unspoken. I tried to refocus, scrolling through updates, but the air in the apartment had changed. The hum of the fridge seemed louder. The light coming through the curtains had softened, making the edges of her profile look warmer, closer. Then her phone buzzed on the desk beside us. She glanced at the screen, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then locked the phone without answering. "Just someone who used to call a lot," she said, her tone making it clear she wasn't inviting more questions. I didn't press, but I wanted to. She reached for the charger and our fingers brushed again. Not the way strangers do, but the way two people do when neither of them is pulling away. "Sorry," she said, though it didn't sound like an apology. "It's fine." The phone buzzed again, this time more insistent, and she silenced it without looking. I noticed her breathing had slowed, like she was trying to steady herself. "Do you want me to go?" I asked. She looked up at me, her eyes catching mine for a second too long. "Do you want to?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, there was a knock at her door. Sharp, impatient. We both froze. Her expression changed instantly. Whatever was between us a moment ago went into hiding. She stood, smoothing her sweater. "Wait here," she whispered, before slipping toward the entry. I heard muffled voices. A man's, low but clipped. I couldn't make out the words, but the tension in her posture when she returned told me enough. Whoever it was, she wasn't happy to see them. "Wrong apartment," she said flatly, though I didn't believe her. When she sat back down, I could still feel the edge of whatever had passed between her and the visitor. Her hand trembled slightly when she reached for the mouse. I should have said something to break the heaviness, but instead I found myself asking quietly, "Claire, are you okay?" She turned to me, her lips parting like she was about to really answer, but then she stopped. Her gaze flicked to my mouth for the briefest second before meeting my eyes again. "Stay a little longer," she said, and I knew, without her saying it, that we were closer to crossing that line than either of us could take back. Her words, "Stay a little longer," hung between us like the room itself was holding its breath. I sat back down, not because I needed to, but because leaving now would have felt like walking away from something I might never get close to again. Claire didn't speak right away. She just opened the laptop, fingers resting on the keys without typing. I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock, the fridge humming, the muted traffic outside. Every small sound suddenly too loud in the quiet between us. "You didn't have to come up here today," she said finally. "I know. And you don't have to stay now." "I know," I repeated, my voice softer. She turned her chair slightly toward me, folding one leg underneath her. Her sweater had slipped again, baring her shoulder, and she made no move to fix it. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," she said. I tried to smile. "Good thing or bad thing?" Her eyes dropped for a moment. "Good." Until it wasn't. Something in her tone caught me off guard. A crack in the composed woman I'd been looking at all afternoon. "What happened?" I asked before I could stop myself. She hesitated, then shrugged like it was easier to make it small than to make it real. "I trusted the wrong person." I didn't know if she meant in love, in life, or both. But I knew she wasn't talking about just the past anymore. I'm not him, I said quietly. Her gaze met mine again, and for the first time, I saw the faintest shimmer of doubt in her eyes. Not about me, but about herself. You say that now. I leaned forward without meaning to, drawn in by the weight of her words. You think I'd hurt you? I think... She stopped, exhaling. I think I've already let you stay too long. But she didn't ask me to leave. We sat there, looking at each other, the hum of the fridge and the ticking clock fading until there was only her, only me, and the way the space between us felt thinner than air. I could have said something then, a confession, a promise, anything to tip us over the edge. Instead, my hand brushed against hers on the desk, and she didn't move. Her fingers curled slightly, almost meeting mine. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but then, silence. Just her eyes, locked on mine, asking a question I wasn't sure either of us was ready to answer. Her fingers were still curled near mine when she finally spoke. You really don't remember me, do you? The question was so unexpected, it took a moment to process. What? She leaned back slightly, studying me like she was trying to fit me into a memory. 7 years ago, a coffee shop on Oak Street. I spilled my drink on your notebook. You were reading something, poetry, I think. You didn't even get mad. I searched her face, digging through hazy recollections, and then, faintly, I saw it. A younger version of her, hair longer, laughing awkwardly as she tried to mop up a mess with too few napkins. I'd forgotten the details, but the feeling of that moment. It was there. That was you, I said. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I remembered right away when I saw you in the hall last month. The revelation made everything feel different. Not less intense, but heavier, like the ground beneath us had shifted. You didn't say anything, I murmured. Would you have come up here today if I had? She asked. I didn't know the answer. The silence stretched, and then her phone buzzed again on the desk. She didn't move to pick it up, so I glanced at the screen without thinking. The name was just Mark. Her eyes caught mine. It's my ex, she said simply. He still thinks there's something to fix. And is there? I asked. She shook her head. No, but he's not the kind of man who likes to be replaced. Something in her tone made me bristle. Is that what this is? Replacing him? Her gaze sharpened. Is that what you think you're doing? The question landed harder than I expected. I wanted to say no, to insist this was more than that. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what this was yet. She stood and walked toward the window, keeping her back to me. I thought maybe you'd be different. Not because you're younger. Because you looked at me like I wasn't broken. The words hit me like a punch because she was right. I had looked at her that way. And now I realized she'd been carrying that weight long before today. I stood, closing the space between us. Claire? Before I could say more, there was a sharp knock on the door, louder than before. Her whole body went tense. She turned to me, eyes wide. You need to decide right now, she whispered. Do you stay, or do you leave? And in that moment, I realized the choice wasn't just about the knock. It was about us. The knock came again, harder, impatient. Claire didn't move toward the door. She just kept her eyes on me, waiting. I should have walked out. That would have been cleaner, easier, safer. But my feet didn't move. Instead, I stepped closer until we were only a breath apart. I'm staying, I said. Something flickered in her expression. Relief, fear, maybe both. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you should know. This isn't simple for me. I don't want simple, I said, and I meant it. The knock turned into pounding now, followed by a muffled voice. Male, sharp, the kind of tone that didn't ask, it demanded. She closed her eyes for a moment, then exhaled like she was letting go of something heavy. Mark doesn't scare me anymore, but I can't pretend he's not a part of why I'm careful. I nodded, not breaking eye contact. I'm not here to be him, or to fix you. I'm here because I stopped, swallowing the words I hadn't planned to say today. Because I can't seem to walk away from you. For a long second, she didn't move. Then she reached up, her hand resting against my jaw. Tentative at first, like she was still deciding if she had the right. You have no idea how long it's been since someone said that without wanting something in return. I shook my head. I do want something. Her lips curved just slightly. What? To see where this goes. The pounding stopped suddenly, leaving only the sound of our breathing in the quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. Claire's hand slipped from my face, but she didn't step back. If we do this, she said, her voice steady now, it has to be real, not a distraction. Not a game you get bored of in a month. It's not a game. For the first time since I'd walked in that afternoon, she smiled without restraint. Then I guess you'd better come back tomorrow. The tension in the room didn't disappear. It just shifted, becoming something less dangerous and more deliberate. I nodded once, feeling the weight of what we'd just agreed to without actually saying it. I will. When I finally left her apartment, the air in the hallway felt different, like I'd crossed an invisible line and there was no going back. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of Mark's knock or even the choice I'd made, but because I kept replaying the look on Claire's face when I told her I couldn't walk away. When I saw her the next day, she was leaning against the doorframe, coffee in hand. No tension this time, no guarded posture. Just her calm, present, as if the decision we'd both made was already woven into the air between us. Wi-Fi still working? I asked, half smiling. She laughed softly. Perfect. But that's not why I asked you to come back. We didn't talk about Mark, or the pounding on her door. She didn't need to explain, and I didn't need to pry. Whatever history she had with him, it wasn't the shadow she'd be living under anymore. Not if I could help it. Instead, we talked about everything else. The books she'd been meaning to read. The corner cafe she still missed from her old neighborhood. How I'd forgotten the coffee shop spill until she reminded me, and how strange it felt to realize she'd remembered all this time. It struck me then that this wasn't about fixing anything. It was about choosing to stay, even when walking away would have been simpler. For me, it was the moment I understood that the pull I felt toward her wasn't just attraction. It was recognition. Something in her had found something in me and refused to let go. By the time I left that evening, we hadn't crossed the physical line most people would expect. But in all the ways that mattered, we had already stepped into something irreversible. Weeks passed. The knocks stopped. The phone calls slowed. And the space between us, once measured in cautious glances and half-finished sentences, became something we walked through freely. One evening, months later, I asked her why she let me stay that first day. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. Because you didn't come here to take something from me. You came here, like you were already mine. And maybe she was right. Moral. Sometimes, the risk isn't in falling for someone. It's in staying long enough to see what love becomes when it's chosen, not chased.